Okay, we have Barbara Harper back on the podcast. She has been gracious enough to agree to another episode. And for those of you listening, I highly, highly recommend going back to our episode called Embracing Waterbirth, where we talk all things about water birth. And Barbara Harper was highly influential on the choices that I made for the birth of both of my daughters. So go back to that episode and get all of the information and a lot of the evidence that backs up water birth. And today we're going to dive into a few different things. But before we get into that, I just want to say thank you, Barbara, for coming onto the podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know you've been in lots of parts of the world, so just give us a little tidbit of information of what you've been up to lately.
Oh, thank you so much, Cindy, for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure to speak with someone who has as much naturopathic knowledge and gravitas that you do. So it's quite an honor to discuss with you the things that we have been writing back and forth about. Yes, what is this? This is the 9th of January. I got home from basically 4 months of travel. I got home on about 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and I must say that I'm in this time zone now, but I was my last time zone prior to coming home was Cairo, Egypt. And yeah, I mentioned to you that I only drink hot water, and I learned how to say, "May I please have hot water?" in Arabic this trip. It was kind of hard, but I kept working on it. And so on this trip, the 4 months, it started out in southern Colombia. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry, northern Colombia, because when you're in that part of the world, you have to think that the directions are kind of reversed. In other words, like when you point down, you're actually pointing north instead of the other way. So there's an incredible couple that took one of my 7-day workshops for doctors. They came from Colombia, and there were three physicians that I had for 7 days, 3 days of water birth training and 4 days of hypnosis training. And we've always stayed in touch. That was in Mexico in November of 20, no, it was 2021. So long story short, they invite me to Colombia, and we have a 3-day water birth training with about 40 people, doctors, midwives, doulas, that I call the birth guardian workshops. And so I started there, then I transferred over to Lima, Peru, and did a week in Colombia, a week in Lima, and found a homeopathic compounding pharmacy in downtown Lima, Peru, and replaced all of my homeopathic remedies in my birth kit. And that was there were many highlights of that trip. I came home for Yom Kippur and then immediately turned around and went on a trip to the Philippines. And the in the Philippines, I was there for 3 weeks at a clinic called Glory Reborn. And they've been in business for 20 years, and they offer free services to the poor. And I helped them introduce water birth there. I went there last year, and we started doing water births in a one remodeled room. And so I've been meeting with heads of the government and places like that so we can get water birth accepted across the board, teaching medical schools there. And when I was finished with that work, I flew to Turkey. And then from Turkey, I flew to Tanzania. And in Turkey, I have friends who've I trained in water birth. So if I think about all the places that I've been, 79 countries, I would never have to stay at home. I could go from place to place to place because honestly, these doctors and midwives that I've trained want to continuously update and take more workshops, and they've all become cherished friends. And sons and daughters, and to see how things have changed around the world is just incredible. So I finished in Tanzania, then went and had a government meeting with the deputy minister of health of Egypt to talk about their 83% cesarean rate.
Wow.
And they've been working on a plan that I sat in that office for 2.5 hours with my friend Karen, who I have trained also. And we have something called the Birth Guardian Academy. And that's for training doulas, training women who speak Arabic to be infiltrating into the hospitals so that they know the truth and they can start communicating with those clients who start asking then for the changes, like delayed cord clamping. That's
Mm.
a very simple one that we can institute in every single hospital in the world without question. And it doesn't take any money. It doesn't take any resource to be able to change that paradigm. And so I started with that. That was the goal. Water birth isn't the goal, but having women comfortable in labor is the goal. And that also doesn't take any money. No, no money whatsoever, no investment, except for education. That's why podcasts like this are so important, so that we can inform women what their quote unquote rights are to a normal vaginal birth without interference. And that's what I teach on the medical school level. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I was teaching in a hospital, or I'm sorry, a medical school in the Philippines, in the island of Cebu. And every single island, there's 3,700 islands in the Filipino archipelago. And the government seat is in Manila, but each island has their own obstetric society, their own medical schools, and they're very up to date, so to speak. As a matter of fact, there's 3 hospitals in Manila that offer water birth, but this is what I run into. They offer it as a like a bait. Like, come
Mm.
to our hospital, we have water birth, but they know nothing about normal physiologic birth. What can open the pelvis? What can promote better relationship between mother and baby because of skin to skin? People are adopting skin to skin around the world, but they tell me that, oh, we do skin to skin. And I said, great. How long do you keep the cord attached? Oh, well, we cut it right away and we examine the baby and then we bring the baby back. And I said, no, 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 that's not skin to skin. And I informed them through the teachings that Niels Bergman's latest recommendations, he calls it nurture science. And so I came up with an acronym. I like different letters to tell people, remember this, NAP. NAP, newborn assessment priorities. Okay, what's your priority? And that will get us into discussing delayed cord clamping, because the newborn assessment priority is heart rate. Number
Mhm.
one, what's the baby's heart rate? It's not the baby crying, because the baby crying is what we've all become accultured to, that it's not normal if babies don't cry. But what the nurture science has told us is that when baby comes to what I call the sanctuary of mother's chest, and the baby only has one program in its brain, and that program is for connection. Just like a puppy, just like a cat, just like a piglet. One of my friends in Wisconsin, I call her one of my adopted daughters. She's a swim expert, and she and I are creating a teacher training for midwives and doulas and naturopaths, if you want to teach an aquatic fitness class that has a spiritual overlay to it as well. So her pig just had piglets, and she called me to see. This was her first time seeing a birth. And so we had to discuss what was normal. And I shared with her the nurture science, the same science that I teach in medical schools, hospitals. And Niels Bergman says that the baby's brain, in order to wire, and this is where I came up with a local area network. Do you remember back when computers didn't have Wi-Fi? Okay. But you could hook two computers together through a router and a local area network. Okay. And so local area network has to be established between the mother's brain and the baby's brain. And that's what I take that LAN and say it stands for love, attention, and nurturing. Okay.
Mhm.
And that has to be established right away, immediately, as soon and before the baby takes a first breath.
Mhm. Yeah.
You don't take the baby away. You leave the cord attached to pump the the 1/3 of the baby's blood that's in the placenta at any given moment during birth. And that has to go in to fill the capillaries, the capillary venules, the capillary arterioles of this newborn's lung cells.
Yeah.
And the pulmonary transfusion is necessary to happen first. Dr. Judith Mercer, she's a CNM who sponsored and was sponsored by NIH to do delayed cord clamping research. Her seminal study on a 30-second delay for premature babies born by cesarean was published in 2002, and it created waves in the scientific community, but the practice of delayed cord clamping hasn't been adopted everywhere. And
Mm.
so they keep studying, they keep looking at it with randomized controlled trials. But you know what she told me when she was conducting that study? Um, she's now in her mid 80s, and the original study was published in 2002, and they had a box where she would have to pull out a card, and the card either said ICC, immediate cord clamping, or DCC, delayed cord clamping. And every time she got the ICC, she would weep
Oh, yeah.
because she knew that she was damaging the health and well-being of that new person who was coming into its physical body for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though that was the standard practice.
It was standard practice.
Yeah.
And they were trying to prove that there would be an improvement in health and well-being of this new baby, this new human being, if they
Mhm.
delayed. And so everything is contingent upon the practices that we do during the actual birth.
Yeah.
Everything about our health is contingent upon our health, our well-being, our mental capacity, our spiritual growth potential, our microbiome. Everything is contingent upon how you handle birth.
Absolutely. And that's a big part of the mission of what I'm doing today. And just to clarify for the listeners, because I've used that metaphor of mom and baby connecting their Wi Fi many, many times when I'm speaking to people, and bringing the baby out right onto mom's chest, the sanctuary, as you call it, and leaving the cord intact until the placenta is birthed. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I would give you like 300% emojis if we were texting.
Thank you. I receive all those emojis with love. And that's a very, very rare practice, even with home births. That's a rare practice. With my first daughter, we clamped and cut the cord before the placenta was born. And with my second, it happened quickly, and so it was technically a free birth, and so everything was intact. And I thought, like, wow, this is so rare, this never happens. I gave her the middle name of Lotus because it was technically a lotus birth, right? But
Mhm.
that should be the standard practice, because let's get into a bit of the science of why that should be the standard practice.
Well, first of all, I mentioned the 33%, 1/3 of the baby's blood is in the placenta at the time of birth. It's not placental blood, it's not cord blood. It's the newborn's blood. It's newborn blood. It's still circulating, and the pump is going to keep pumping and bringing that blood into the baby. The science behind, I've heard this statement, and I'm sure you have as well. I was arguing with a pediatrician in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and I was giving a seminar like I usually do, and I'm talking about delayed cord clamping. And he said, well, I can't do delayed cord clamping because I the blood is going to go back to the baby. If I leave the cord intact, it's going to drain the baby's blood back into the placenta, and then
Mhm.
it's going to get trapped there. And okay, I tried to keep a straight face. All right.
I've heard this too.
Yeah. And I said, let me share some articles with you, because you need to read about the actual physiology of what happens at the moment of birth. It's a physiologic response as the baby comes into the atmosphere that stimulates their face to sense the presence of nitrogen for the first time and the presence of gravity. And that sends a signal to the brain that basically says, close the shunts in the heart after you change the pH of the cerebral spinal fluid, because we are connected in every single way to the signals from the brain. Okay, we're a machine in that respect, but we're not a machine that is open to changing the program.
Mhm.
So if you cut the cord immediately, you now have less blood volume, and you now have less to transfer into the lungs for the first time,
Mhm.
into those capillaries that engorge with blood, and basically the pressure changes in the lungs, which allows the surfactant that's in every single alveolar space to leave. And this is like a deflated water balloon, and that leaves into those capillaries, increases the blood volume by 20%, and opens up those alveolar spaces so that now oxygen and carbon dioxide can be exchanged. How long does that take? It takes a few seconds. It's not milliseconds. Especially a water baby that has been under the water, or a breech baby that its head has been inside while the whole body is exposed. And the question is to breathe or not to breathe.
Mhm.
And so we get so caught up with that. You have to stimulate the baby to make it breathe. And that cutting of the cord is, you just cut off the breathing mechanism's blood supply. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Number one. Number one, violation number one. Violation number two is now you have a hypovolemic baby that has to send 55% of all the blood that's in the baby's body to the lung bed to have that capillary expansion,
Mhm. Mhm.
that capillary erection. and you've just decimated the blood supply. So the baby is going to take what it actually needs in order to breathe, but it's going to be more difficult and more timely. It's going to take a little bit more time for that first breath to begin because now we don't have a huge blood volume to work with. So if we send all that blood to the baby without the placenta, without that 33%, we're going to have a baby that is more likely to need to be resuscitated.
Yeah. I was just going to say,
Because we've set up these artificial timelines that say, oh, our brain is going to go into a state of apoplexy, basically, because there's not enough oxygen and we're going to create brain damage. So hurry, 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 get that baby sending oxygen, which starts at birth at about 66%. And by 10 minutes, with the cord intact, in that 10 minutes, it goes up to 98%. But if you cut the cord, you struggle to get that 98% oxygen by 10 minutes. And you have a baby that then is rushed to the NICU because it's still bluish and it doesn't have enough oxygen because it doesn't have enough blood volume. And then,
Barbara,
yeah,
this is a mic drop moment right here. Wow.
yeah.
And that it's standard practice to do this. I mean, we're starting, of course, with the delayed cord clamping, but it's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, up to 3 minutes,
Uh,
like what you're talking about.
every single year, every other year, I still attend births. I still do birth support. Sometimes I come in as a second midwife. Most of the time with my clients, I'm there to be their hypnosis coach, okay? To remind them how powerful they are and hold the space. No expectations, no judgments, but to connect, center, ground, and connect so that I can be a channel so that this woman can unfold in the ways that she needs to unfold and the baby can unfold in the ways that they need to unfold. So every 2 years, I have to take the neonatal resuscitation workshop again. I've probably had it, I don't know, 50 times. Well, it's every 2 years, so maybe 20 times. And I have to take the online exam now. It used to be an exam that you had to sit for. Now you have to take it online. And every single time I take it, I send them a complete bibliography in the notes of the literature, which by multiple scientists in multiple countries around the world who have done the randomized controlled trials and seen the increase in hemoglobin, hematocrit, and also brain myelinization with a 5-minute delay.
Wow.
You get better communication in the neurons in your brain.
Yeah.
You increase your IQ scores.
Just with 5 minutes.
5 minutes is the minimum,
Yeah.
not the maximum. What you talked about is what I describe as optimal cord clamping because you sever the cord after the placenta is born an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours later. It doesn't matter. And people ask me all the time, well, why? Why delay the cord that long, 24 hours? I said, because it cocoons the mother and baby, because nobody wants to hold a newborn baby and the placenta at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a way of keeping the mother baby dyad together.
Completely. So let's go back to Niels Bergman. Niels
Yeah.
Bergman calls it nurture science, and I call it that local area network or love, attention, and nurturing. And his science says that the baby needs a continuous stimulation of the mother's breathing, heart rate, and attention, love, attention, and nurturing for continuously for a minimum of 6 hours. It's not the golden hour, Cindy. It's the
Mm.
golden lifetime. And there's just nothing to do in that 6 hours. And that's what we were doing at the Bliss Birth Center when I was working there in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. And then we closed because it's very difficult to maintain midwives and train midwives for gentle birth and 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 pay them the salary that they deserve. That birth attendance is probably the most important job on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And
It's
when
active.
it's a given for us to have, okay, I'm gonna go back also to I'm sitting in the Deputy Minister of Health's room consulting, and there's two other pediatricians there and my friend Karen, and the five of us are having this discussion about birth. And remember, I told you that the one thing that doesn't cost any money is delayed cord clamping. All right. The next thing that doesn't cost any money is leaving the baby here
On the chest.
for the entire stay in the hospital.
Mm.
Okay. Leaving the baby here and having a bassinet beside the bed, and especially for the first 3 days, because, and I'm saying this is the only thing that this requires is education.
Yeah.
So, and none of this is going to happen. We can put doulas in there, we can put nurses and midwives in, because Egypt has no midwifery program, no education whatsoever. But we have to change the doctors. What they are taught in medical school is birth is an emergency. And it's a miracle if they don't have to intervene. It's a true miracle.
Mm.
This is how you end up with cesarean rates of higher than 80%, higher than 50%, higher than 30%,
Of
because
course.
you look at birth as an emergency waiting to happen,
Mm.
and you train your workers into excellent surgeons, and they can handle emergencies, but they have never, ever, ever, ever seen a normal birth. They've never seen a lotus birth. They've never seen. And that's what I tried to get across. And I told her she wanted me to write a program for training doulas and putting them into the hospitals. She wanted 2,500 doulas by July. And it was like, let's train 2,500 doctors by July, because the mother's brain has layers and layers and layers of stories. The mother's brain is influenced by her childhood, her birth, when she was born, and the things that were done to her to create separation,
Mm.
because separation is a violation of this innate biological agenda in both the mother's brain and the baby's brain, but especially in this new human being.
So we're wired for that connection. And when it doesn't happen, it interferes, it interrupts with that signal, with that Wi-Fi that you're talking about.
It interrupts the love, attention, and nurturing. And when that doesn't come, we go, and
Yeah.
and we suddenly forget, because we have to compensate. This is what Gabor Mate says: all addiction begins in the womb. When I heard him say that on a Democracy Now! Video, it was like, he gets it. He
Mm-hmm.
understands. I have to talk to this man. He's in Vancouver, and I looked him up and I started calling his office. I need to have an appointment with you. And Yes, I have addictions. I'm a sugar addict, okay? I'm a recovering cookie-holic. Okay. Christmas is a horrible season for me because my addiction's like, oh, cookie.
Yeah. They're
So
everywhere and they're beautiful.
I had to talk to him. And so I got his schedule and I saw where he was lecturing. This was 2017. And I followed him. I flew into Virginia. He was at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And so I actually flew into Washington, D.C., rented a car, advertised on Facebook. I'm going to see this guy who's incredible. I've read all of his books. And some people came with me, and I spent the night there. But as God would have it, I got invited to the after lecture party because I just made myself present and said, I have to talk to him. And this is what we don't understand about birth on that we are programmed for connection 100%. The birth practices that we've been doing for centuries have interrupted that connection to put us where we are today in the most addicted and separated world that we've ever experienced,
Hmm.
ever.
I agree.
So, what can we do? You and I take on the instructions. It's our passion, it's our life's mission. I wrote my mission down, Cindy. I was 13 years old, and I had to watch my mother give birth through a window outside of the hospital because the hospital had the rules that you had to be 16 before you could walk through the door of a hospital and be with your mother while she gave birth or visit somebody. Your grandmother was dying and you couldn't go in because you weren't 16.
There's that
Stupid.
disconnection. Yeah.
And so I watched my mother get a saddle block, and the doctor didn't have to cut an episiotomy because it was her fifth baby, but she had some sort of drugs for induction. Okay. And I wrote in my journal, we must change the way we welcome babies into the world.
Mm.
And, I kind of said that was my mission to God. And then I tried to ignore it for the next 10 years. And I got 100% on my maternal child health exams when I took my nursing degree. And and I could not stand what we did in OB. I got fired from OB. I got fired for reporting doctors for too big episiotomies, for taking the scissors and putting them in my pockets,
Oh my gosh.
for knocking the bulb syringe off the table
Mm.
because I could see the babies grimacing and going like this,
Mm.
like trying to escape this torture.
Mm.
And and that's why I wrote Gentle Birth Choices. It wasn't about water birth. Water birth was a gift that allowed us to talk about gentle birth because the mother's brain needs 16 hours of uninterruption in order to rewire and create new pathways that will help her tune and connect on that local area network.
Mm.
Because if
16
she's
hours post birth with the baby.
she has to have quiet time alone, which means that all of our postpartum practices have to change as well. We have to support the mother in order to spend that 40 days with the baby, that
Hmm.
40 days of connection. And yes, I've slept in postpartum hospitals in China, in Taiwan, and they're really cool because there's big like king size beds because the husband can come and stay with the mother. But she's in that facility with all of her needs met for
Mhm.
40 fucking days.
What? What?
Yes,
That's
yes,
incredible. I
yes.
always talk about the first 40 days, the fourth trimester, this cocoon that the mother baby dyad should be in with the community supporting her. But to actually hear about it taking place is a little bit mind blowing. It's so far from what our culture practices today.
One of my dear friends, her English name is Fanny. She's Chinese, and she and her husband started a post. It's basically like an Airbnb in their four-bedroom apartment in Xi'an, China. And she and I got close because she took my birth guardian workshop in Xi'an. I was going there every year for multiple years, teaching doctors and midwives, and sometimes pregnant women would come. And oh my God, the workshops were 4 and 5 days, so transformational, extremely. And she invited me into her home for her second baby, which was quote unquote illegal in China, but not really. Yeah, home birth was totally illegal.
Mm.
You cannot even get a passport or a birth certificate for your baby if it's born at home.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, I pulled some strings because I was working at the Angel Hospital in Xi'an. I was training them to do water births. I was staying in her house. She was pregnant. We planned a home birth. And so I from the hospital with and like, don't tell anybody, but they gave me a whole birth kit. Of course, I had my Doppler with me. I had my homeopathic remedies with me. I had the things that I generally use in a home birth and pediatric stethoscope, lots of different things. So she had her second baby at home in their bathtub, and she wrote an entire book about it. And while I was staying there for her postpartum, a woman came in for her postpartum. And her sister came in, did all the cooking, just absolutely all the dishes that you're supposed to eat to increase your vitality, to induce healing. So there was ginger, there was the special soups, the special hot water every day. And and you stay in your pajamas, not the 5 days in the bed and the 5 days on the bed and the 5 days near the bed. You stay there for a whole 40 days.
As it should
And
be.
yeah, and so she was in postpartum and it was incredible. But the books that she wrote in Chinese was called My Second Baby.
Mm.
And she published it, and she gained enough income from that to buy a farm. and,
Good for her.
and she did a free birth with her third baby. She wanted me to come back, but the timing wasn't right.
Mm.
And it's incredible because so I've attended numerous births in China without telling anybody. And
Barbara,
teach
you rebel.
I'm a yeah, rebel. But teaching these principles and practices to medical schools and doctors and the we've talked about the benefits of delayed cord clamping for the baby, but there's also benefits for the mother.
Mm.
By waiting for the placenta, you reduce the chances of postpartum hemorrhage. By keeping baby in the sanctuary, we create more oxytocin flow
Mhm.
so that the placenta will separate on the third contraction after birth. That's the normal.
Yeah.
This overwhelming, it's the biggest contraction of the whole entire labor.
Mm.
The placenta involutes and then comes out either upside down or front side or back side because it folds in on itself.
So it usually comes out, usually detaches within 3 contractions
Three
after the
contractions.
baby is delivered, is born. Okay.
Mhm.
And I've heard you talk about on other podcasts how long you've waited for the placenta to actually be born.
Mhm.
And it's not within the like 5-10 minutes or 20 minutes that we usually give.
The delays can happen, and there's two ways to determine. First of all, you do an assessment. You don't go digging in the fundus to dig the placenta off, either external or internal. Somebody, a doctor from the Philippines in Los Angeles, I think I was at Little Company of Mary Hospital. That's where my grandson was born in a normal birth. But she put up her hand and she goes, "Well, you didn't tell us how to do a manual removal of the placenta in the water." And why would I tell you that? It's not, A, it's not necessary, and B, it would be dangerous for the mother to do that. And it would be dangerous to do that in any birth, a manual removal of the placenta. And she said, "Well, I do it in all my births
As like a routine practice.
as routine." Once again, routine practices. I ask doctors all over the world to give me the routine practices, and I will give you all of the information why you should stop. And turn the tables and let the mother. How do you think I got so smart about this? Yes, I read literature every Tuesday and Thursday. Okay. It's my research days. And
Mhm.
I'm way behind the research because I was traveling for 4 months. And in 4 months, there's a lot of research to read. But if they've never seen a normal birth, how I got smart was watching women tell me what they needed to do, what their body was directing them to do. Not
Mhm.
a single woman lies down on her back and gives birth with her legs pulled up as her chosen position. No, given the opportunity, she will dance and sing and move her pelvis and get on her knees. And my favorite position is one knee on the floor, one foot on the floor, and one hand on the floor. I call it the tripod.
I've seen videos of that, yeah.
Yeah, and her other hand is on top of the baby's head.
Yeah, when
And
we
this,
follow our intuition, we move in certain ways, we vocalize in certain ways, and it's you're so embodied. It's not a cognitive, it's not an intellectual thing.
you never know what programs in the brain are going to emerge during that time. And with this particular woman, that I waited for over 6 hours for the placenta. Okay. We both took a nap. We both fell asleep. And
Oh.
there's a difference. So you're checking if the placenta is above the umbilicus, the belly button, then it's still attached to the wall of the uterus.
Mm.
If the fundus is high, okay? If it's below, then it's not attached anymore.
Mhm.
And there's there's really no hurry to get it out if there's no sign of hemorrhage.
Mhm.
And this particular woman, we both took a nap, and it's hard for me to remember because it was 19, and she'd had a water birth in my bathtub. Okay. I had sent the children away for a little while. My husband, we had another house where they could all go, his painting studio. And there she was. I attended lots of births in my home. And she was tired, but worked hard to get the baby out. And I asked her when we woke up, why did she still want to be pregnant? And she just looked at me and tears just started running down her face. And then she started sobbing. And she said, "As long as I'm pregnant, somebody will care for me." And
So you just intuitively asked her that question with what was unfolding in front of you.
it was it was intuition, but I had to ask her that question to decide what homeopathic remedy to give to her.
Mm. Yeah.
because you have to understand the emotional component. You have to understand this network in the brain that when it switches from the parasympathetic nervous system, which is calm and connection and curiosity, and it goes into the sympathetic nervous system, the left brain, the right brain, and you suddenly start thinking thoughts of I'm not good enough. I'm not capable enough. I'm I should have done this. I should have done that.
Mm. Reminds me of Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No. I met him many years ago as well. And it's in front of us, like what is happening on a deep programming level, what our
Yeah.
conditioning has taught us since childhood. It is shown in the physical world. And
Take, for instance, the woman that hemorrhaged in my practice. It was a severe hemorrhage after the placenta was born in normal time, 20 minutes. Beautiful water birth. And she stood up after the placenta was out, and it was like a faucet. She was bleeding. And I immediately gave her Ignatia, 200 CK. Ignatia is for deep grief because women will hold their angst and their grief and their pain in their uterus.
mm-hmm,
You use it as a vessel, our anger especially. This is where fibroids come from. This is where PCOS comes from. It's that internal damage that of the thoughts that we think, and of course, the food that we eat. We're not taking care of the body, and so if we're stuffing our feelings with cookies, that's where my addiction came from. It took me years to discover that stuff the feelings, you know,
mm-hmm.
just get through it, just get through it, just get through it.
As we're conditioned to do since childhood, just get through it.
Yeah. So when we look at postpartum, the woman that I gave her Ignatia called the hospital, talked to my backup doctor, and he said, we'll send a nurse over to help you. This was early in my practice, and there was such cooperation. I worked in his office 3 days a week, and a nurse came over from the hospital, and we inserted an IV, and she was fine. The woman that was retaining her placenta without a hemorrhage, I gave her also Ignatia because that grief of her thoughts, she was homeless. She had no place to live, and she was sure that CPS was going to take her baby away. And so I just informed my husband. I said, she's going to stay with us for a while until she gets on her feet and she gets a job and she's able to care for her baby. And or I can find her a place to live where she can have a roommate and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. So there were two different stories. The story of the woman that led after birth was that she gave birth 18 years prior, but she gave the baby up for adoption. And in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, her uterus remembered,
Of course. Yeah.
and she was crying
Yeah.
through her uterus. She and I did a session after that as well. And she found her 18-year-old son and started a relationship with him.
Oh, beautiful. Wow.
So the the mysteries of reproduction,
And there are many.
well, it begins with that initial connection.
Mm-hmm.
We're programmed to connect. It's how we're wired.
Yeah.
And if we interrupt that connection, and then if we, I always say, we've kind of mechanized the birth, and we take the baby, put it in a bassinet, take the baby out of the bassinet, put it in a seat or a crib, and we
Mhm.
take the baby and give it a bottle, and we just create disconnection, 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 disconnection.
Mhm.
My teachings are about, and this new book I'm writing I'm finishing the writing. I've been promising this book for 20 years after because it's been 20 years since I published Gentle Birth Choices. And I've needed to get to this point. I needed to work at the birth center. I needed to see what the hypnosis courses that I was teaching the parents could actually do to change their brains, to
Mhm.
rewire. And I use this analogy. You can't control the wind, but you're given sails, and you learn how to control the sails, to stay afloat, to ride whatever's going through. And it's a way of staying calm, connected, and curious.
Mhm.
Life, about birth. And so I had to see what that was doing. And yes, I saw a couple of hemorrhages during that 3.5, almost 4 years. But 90% of the births were just 99% of the births were just incredible. With people coming back and saying, I didn't feel a thing other than connection to my baby. So it's possible.
Mhm.
Michel Audin, when I would ask him about, I, I, I asked him about meconium. Meconium, I said, is this an indication that the baby is in trouble? And he said, no, no, it's a normal physiology. I said, can we make the presence of meconium in the liquor, in the amniotic fluid, an indication for a water birth? Because in a water birth, it washes off. And I've seen plugs of meconium come out of the nose. And he looked at me and he said, it's a possibility, but you'd never find enough babies with ruptured membranes that you're seeing meconium in a normal birth because we don't rupture the membranes. So, and most of the membranes that rupture are right before the baby's born.
Mhm.
And it's common practice to rupture the membranes on every single woman in the hospital in the Philippines, every single woman at a hospital in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, every single woman at a hospital in Turkey.
Mhm.
It's not, and just name me a country and I'll tell you if it's standard practice,
Mhm.
and it is, except in the UK, except in Germany, except where midwives are the gatekeepers for normal birth.
Mhm.
If midwives are in charge, they're not going to do that because they're not waiting for an accident to happen. They actually, where I said, obstetricians think that birth is an accident waiting to happen and it's a miracle if they don't intervene.
Mhm.
Whereas midwives look at birth as a miracle and they only intervene when it's necessary.
As it should be.
So that's with delayed cord clamping, that's with delayed placentas. It's typical for a midwife to wait for up to an hour, but you're also investigating, has the placenta dropped? Is it off the wall of the uterus? Or
Mhm.
do you go to a higher level of care? And so you make this investigation, and we know what to do in case of an emergency. And you're trained. There was a doctor that raised his hand at Chicago Northwestern. I was giving a program about water birth, and this doctor raised his hand during Q&A, and he said, so I don't cut an episiotomy. I don't pull the baby out. No, I don't cut the cord. Did I hear you right that they might leave the hospital with the baby still attached to the placenta? It's a possibility. And so he said, so how do I justify my fees if I don't do anything?
It's a good
And
question.
there you could hear some snickers in the audience, like
Mm.
from the midwives mostly. And I looked heavenward. And before I finished my prayer, oh, please, Lord, give me a good answer. I said, does the lifeguard on the beach get paid if he doesn't have to rescue someone? Yeah, he knows what normal looks like. He knows what normal splashing in the water looks like, what normal swimming looks like. And unfortunately, you're not taught what normal looks like. You've only seen birth with intervention, birth with disturbance. And what I'm talking about is undisturbed and being close enough to observe, but not close enough to disturb.
Mhm.
You're you're paid to watch the process. You're paid to sit in the corner and knit. That was one of Michel Audon's favorites. Or sit in the corner and paint a picture on canvas like Jose Luis Grefnes in Guadalajara. That was his favorite thing to do, was to sit there and paint a portrait of this woman in labor. His office was, every single wall was a gorgeous painting that he'd painted.
Mm. And that's when you get the low transfer rates to the hospital, the low intervention rates, the low C-section rates, which I'm sure is very much the opposite of what's happening in Cairo. And it is certainly the education of the practitioners, because it's not about bringing in a whole new cohort of doulas or birth support workers. It is about educating the practitioners. And what I'm seeing, and I want your take on this, is a lot of women saying, like, we can do better. We're just going to take matters into our own hands. We're going to, support each other outside of the hospital system. And
Yeah.
that, for me, there is a sense of empowerment there, but there's also a severance. There's a more disconnection. And so when I look at the birth world itself, I don't want it to be more disconnection, like we're just going to say no to this whole system and do it ourselves. I think true peace, which is really what I think all humans on earth right now truly want, is when we come together and we support each other and we use what's available to us. But there has to be this paradigm shift, which is what you're doing, going from country to country to country and just showing the practitioners what's possible.
It's it's my mission. We must change the way we welcome babies into the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I've changed babies to new human beings
Yeah.
because it's not about birthing. It's not about getting a baby out. It's about creating a fully functional, connected, curious human being.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the goal here. To
And we're
that
not
end,
fragmented.
I've started the paperwork and I'm building a board of directors for the Gentle Birth World Foundation.
Mm.
I wrote it down in 2021. I had all the pieces and I've just been waiting for the right timing and it came full frontal when I was in Tanzania. That's how they pronounce it there,
Mm.
Tanzania. I like that pronunciation
Me too.
because my dear adopted daughter Agnes, she has created after 3 times taking the water birth or the birth guardian workshop, basically, has started her own birth center. And she did the paperwork with the government and got it approved and rented a building. And she and I sat down after the workshop, and I said, we need to fund you. We need to get funds in here in order for you to carry on this work, because she's part of the legacy that I have to leave.
Mm.
And so I sat down and we did drawing paper, and she brought in someone, and we were building. It's 4 stories, and I said, this is your vision. I want you to make your vision come true. And so the bottom floor is a clinic. The second and third floor are the birth rooms. There's 8 birth rooms. And the top floor is your private residence. So you can just walk down the stairs and go to a birth. And 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 so we met with the architect and the designer, and I funded the birth center. I funded it.
Beautiful.
And I need to raise more money so we can perpetuate it. But it'll perpetuate itself, just like the clinic in the Philippines. Even though they do free births, we have enough women that, because I would tell you right today, if you're in a place that where you can't get what you want, get on a friggin' plane and go to Tanzania, go to Turkey, to one of my 2 doctor friends that will do a birth that you want. You want a breech water birth? I'm going to send you to any number of places where you can have that. You want twins born in water, and I'm going to send you to Colombia. I'm going to send you someplace where they will welcome you and
Mm.
do everything you need. And that's what the Gentle Birth World Foundation is about funding all these places. And it's not about changing the systems on the inside, it's about building new systems that support what we actually need.
Hmm. Absolutely. And it kind of makes the old ones obsolete because women they desire what they desire. And once
Yeah,
we're educated, once we know what's possible, then there's no turning back, really, Barbara.
no,
You
no.
can't unknow what you know.
I sat in the Dar es Salaam airport. My flight to Cairo was, I think it was supposed to leave about 5:30 in the morning. And it's rare that it's ever on time, because I've been in and out of Dar es Salaam now 3 different times. And I sat there in the lounge and I just started weeping. I was looking at my pictures of births in Tanzania, and I just started weeping and and thanking God and for putting me on this mission. Okay, the new book is The Essential Guide to Waterbirth: 40 Years of Clinical Practice and Research Evidence. And everything that's in there has 40 years of clinical practice and research evidence, like delayed cord clamping and placental transfusion, not cutting episiotomies, the changing positions, upright birth.
Mm.
All of that is in the essential guide, because Waterbirth just is the great equalizer. It equalized everything. It had to step back and say, oh, I'm not going to put my hands in the water. I'm going to be close enough to observe, but not close enough to disturb. I'm going to watch this woman give birth over and over and over and over.
Yeah,
And so,
truly.
and the very first chapter is called The Song of Names. And the Song of Names is the story of Menehuna Hawaiians that would hike up the mountain with the pregnant and laboring woman. And while they were hiking, they would sing to her this baby's lineage of,
Wow.
you are the child of this mother and this father, and that father is the child of this mother and that father. And this woman giving birth is the child of this mother and that father. And they would go all the way to the beginning of time.
Wow. And there is
And
that connection when we become pregnant, I feel, to our lineage. There's an automatic, like I felt anyways, way more connected to my lineage when
that,
I became pregnant.
and we're immortal
Mm.
because time has no beginning and no end.
Mhm.
And this moment of birth has happened for 100,000 generations. Why do we have to go and fuck it up? And that brings me to this. I was writing these lyrics to a rap song. I was on a flight from Newark, New Jersey to Fort Lauderdale, and my seat partner, I was on the aisle, he was on the window, and we were in first class. And people kept stopping by and asking for his autograph. So I knew that he was somebody famous, but I had absolutely no idea. He was a beautiful looking man. And so when the seatbelt light went off, I went up front and I said, "Who am I sitting by?" And she looked at the roster and she said something like Clarence Gilmore or whatever. And I said, "But I don't think that's his, I think he's somebody famous." And she goes, "Oh, yeah. Oh, somebody told me that on this flight was ASAP Rocky." I said, "That's it. That's who I'm sitting beside." And so I went back and gave him my card and I talked to him. And my son is a pretty famous photographer and videographer for GoPro. And we talked about GoPro. And then I said, well, and I told him I'm a midwife. And he said, well, my wife is pregnant. Do you know, can you be her midwife? And I said, well, is it New Jersey? And he said, yes. I said, no, you want to go to our birth center, Lisa Lederer. They do births amazing. And Morristown Medical Center, you can get a water birth there if you want. And I pulled out my computer and started showing him pictures of water births and talking about water birth. And I said, I've always wanted to write a rap song about it. And I said, I've got the first line. It's your birth. It's your baby. No, yes, it's your baby. It's your belly. It's your baby. It's your birth. I said, I need the next line. And I can't say it without bleeping some of the words, but leave me the F alone so I can do my work. It's your it's your baby. It's your belly. It's your baby. It's your birth. And we can even change it into the possessive. It's my belly. It's my baby. It's my birth. Leave me the F alone so I can do my work.
Mm. The mantra
And
for every mom.
and it's not just the mother's work, it's the baby's work. Because the more you relax, the easier it is for the baby to do its program. I did. Yes. You are so beautiful. You're absolutely gorgeous.
My little one came onto the podcast. This is Vienna. She wanted to say hello, and my other one, I was telling her that we are recording today and they have to be very quiet and not come into the room, but here they are. And she said, how does she do all that amazing stuff? I'm like, I'll ask her. We're going to talk about how she does all that amazing stuff. And we got into it. So thank you, Barbara, for telling us about your travels, about all of the amazing people that you connect with, about the impact that you're having on all the practitioners around the world, how you're changing the paradigm that we view birth through. And thank you. Wait 1 second. And we talked a little bit about the placenta, the importance of keeping the umbilical cord intact. And okay, I'm very, very, very distracted right now. But And
It's perfect. I love babies.
and of course you do. You're Barbara Harper. And for the listeners who want a little bit more of the kind of the science of keeping the placenta intact, we talked about the blood volume. There is an importance of the stem cells that come in, the T cells, the iron, the ferritin, and we talked about the pressurization that opens up the lungs so that we can welcome in that oxygen into the baby's body, which is signaled also by the nitrogen receptors in the cheeks. And before we head off, I did want to just ask you about what your thoughts are, if you have any, about ingesting the placenta.
20 years ago, I would have told you ingesting the placental capsules are potentially a good thing. But today, with all of the endocrine disruptors, microplastics, and the bad food that women eat, and the pollution, the placenta is the liver that takes all of those things out. And there's no way that I would ingest that after birth. No way, because you're just going to get more of the toxins. And so, unless you have eaten a really good diet, plant-based with some animal proteins, and really fasted and prepared your body, I would plant a tree on it. I wouldn't eat it.
Okay, that is good to know. And I think that's important to know for a lot of the listeners who might be curious about it, have heard that other people are doing it, questioning it. And yeah, things have just changed. The world that we live in is different than it was, 20, 30, 40 years ago, or, thousands of years ago when this practice began.
I was taught how to dry the placenta and put it through a wooden coffee grinder when I was in Mexico. The doñas, the indigenous midwives, taught me all of that. And they would put the placentas on the fish nets and let them dry in the sun and then break off pieces. But they didn't ingest it. They made creams out of it, placental creams and lotions and things for the belly for their next pregnancy as well. So nobody was ingesting it, but they were putting it on the skin, which would be a milder way of getting those estrogens and hormones into the woman's body. I think that would be a gentler way to do it.
Okay, that's very interesting. I've never thought about putting it topically. Okay. And the last thing that I ask all of my listeners, and I've asked you before on the podcast, so I wonder if your answer will be different than last time. But we talked about this initial imprint that takes place, which is, one of the most important experiences of our whole life. When a new baby enters this reality, we are imprinting it with something. And if things go as they physiologically do, that imprint with the oxytocin and the dopamine is love and safety and trust. Unfortunately, sometimes that's not what happens, and it's not permanent. We can do things to heal that initial imprint, but I'd love to hear what you would like to imprint onto the listeners after this discussion that I think went from, the microcosm of the birth experience to the macrocosm of what is happening in the world right now, all of the disconnection, the mistrust, the fear, the survival mode. What would you like to imprint onto the listeners?
It's never too late to rewire the brain. I've had clients in their 80s that had horrible births. And I started with rebirthing. My good friend, Binnie Ann Dansby, who's in her 80s now, she was the one that started asking me to go to births with her because I had a stethoscope. It was, and she was a rebirther. And Leonard Orr, I worked with him. I talked to and went to seminars with Sandra Ray. Some of those early people, I studied the Course of Miracles in a house in Los Angeles, in Brentwood. And everybody, I understood that now through the work of like Joe Dispenza, and I knew Joe Dispenza before he did what he does now. He was a chiropractor, and everything we talked about throughout this whole podcast. And in my own experience, I've worked with women who had cesarean births, and through hypnosis and affirmation work and changing your routines and understanding how the brain wires. I've done sessions with people in China, Mexico, Argentina, different places around the world, and they've had healings. A doctor that said, I've just given birth to my baby through your work, through that hypnosis that you've done. You've helped me see birth in a different light. And in my own birth, I had asked her, I had requested a cesarean because I thought it was safer. And then she sat in session and cried. I had 45 doctors and midwives for that 7-day workshop in Merida, Mexico. And she sat there and cried, and she wrote to me later and she goes, my child is different because I changed. The behavior of my child, you can rewire the brain for connection. Absolutely. It's best to do it at the time of birth, but it's never too late.
I think that's a really good message for women who have had potentially traumatic births or births that were less than ideal, births that they haven't processed yet and maybe are holding on to some kind of guilt from it. And
Cindy, women bring their trauma to birth. We've been traumatized all of our lives as women. And there isn't, Gabor Mate has taught us that there's not a single person with addiction that didn't have a disconnected birth.
wow.
Okay. It's powerful.
Very powerful.
And it's never too late to change the way that we think. And so a lot of the trauma that we're experiencing today in birth is because every single person in the birth room is traumatized by everything that's going on in the world. I was teaching online in a hospital in West Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, I'm sorry. It was on the West Bank. It's called the St. Joseph's Hospital, and it's an Arabic hospital. And I taught the session in Arabic to Palestinian midwives. And in their private sessions, they would cry and say, I can't be present here. I just can't be present. And that's the problem with the trauma, that nobody's embodied and present in every single moment. There's not a single person in the birth room that's present. And that's what we need to eliminate the trauma, is that holding the space in presence, connecting with the source of all creation. And one of the projects that I started last year was to create 52 weeks of scripture out of the Bible. I've got one that's just Jewish, and I've got one that's both Old Testament and New Testament, because I'm somewhat of a Bible scholar, but I did get help with the New Testament. And I released the first 10 weeks. But in your pregnancy, if you just take 15 minutes a day and stop everything and just be present, it prepares you for birth, to be present in that moment. I want every practitioner to be present. This is why I don't call them doulas, nurses, midwives, or doctors. They're birth guardians. They're guardians of the space.
Yeah. Since our first podcast, I started calling myself a birth guardian because there is no better descriptor of it, really. Just someone who is able to hold space and be present, even with a toddler on their lap.
Do we need in parenting?
Yeah.
This baby does not have regulatory nervous system until after the age of 8. There is no regulatory system. So as parents, from the moment of conception, well, actually from 20 weeks of pregnancy through about the age of 8, they're in a state of hypnosis. They have mirror neurons. They're copying everything that you are presenting to them in your nervous system. And so if we want to eliminate the trauma of birth, we have to eliminate the trauma in our own lives. We bring our trauma with us to the birth room.
It's so big. I always see the birth experience as this just microcosm, this tiny mirror, every single woman birthing as, a fractal of what's going on in the whole world. And for the listeners, oh, you can sense that I'm a little distracted, but I have a toddler on my lap, and Barbara's being so patient with both of us.
So the best way to undistract a child is to sing to them.
Yeah, they do
And
hear me
just
sing a lot.
whatever song you want to sing, you sing it to them now. Whatever song you want to sing, whatever the message is, they'll take it more in a singing voice. They'll listen quietly. They'll hear the song and want to join and sing with you and me. Sing a song, sing a song. I sing a lot of my lessons, like placenta, placenta, hang on. Perfusion. Every baby needs perfusion. Leave the cord intact. Let the baby get all the blood it needs to breathe, to breathe. Every baby needs to breathe. Placentas need to stay intact on the baby. And one of the best times was walking to the cafeteria for lunch, listening to Chinese midwives sing in Chinese, perfusion, perfusion. Every baby needs perfusion.
Barbara, when's your album coming out? We have a rap song. We have a collaboration with ASAP Rocky. We have Perfusion. We've got the Placenta song. And for those of you who can't see, not on video, she's actually calmed my toddler Vienna down, who is just chilling in my lap. So you've worked your magic. Thank you so much.
I have one last song for you.
Okay.
And the last time I sang it was in the Philippines. I think I sang a little bit of it in Tanzania, but in the Philippines, we did dancing with it also. We did square dancing with it. And it originally happened in 2006 on a stage in Lisbon, Portugal. And a midwife and a doula had gotten into a fist fight. They were on the floor, rolling and pulling hair and spitting on each other and fighting. So I jumped up onto the stage and I was next to give a presentation. And I said, oh, the midwives and the doulas should be friends. Ah, oh, the midwives and the doulas should be friends. Ah, putting mothers and babies first, protecting normal, gentle birth. Oh, the midwives and the doula should be friends. Bum, 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 bum. And Michelle O'Don jumped up on the stage with me, and we started do-sa-doing and spinning. And then Naoli Vinavir jumped on the stage, and she started singing in Portuguese. Michelle O'Don was singing in French. I was singing in English. And we carried on and sang, oh, the doctors and the midwives should be friends. Oh, the doctors and the midwives should be friends. Putting mothers and babies first, protecting normal, gentle birth. That's our goal. Oh, the doctors and the midwife should be friends. Bum, ba-dum, bum. We sang 6 verses in the Philippines and included everybody. It's an inclusionary song that puts everything front and centers, putting mothers and babies first, protecting normal, gentle birth. That's the goal.
The
And I have
goal.
so much fun singing and dancing with that song.
That is one of the best stories I have ever heard, ever. Following a brawl of people fighting and just putting that to ease with song and making sure that we are prioritizing what needs to be prioritized, not just in the birth experience, but because we know the ripple effects, the impact that that has on a global level, on an energetic level, because we are all connected.
We have to pull it together so that
Mm,
we can heal the world.
mm, absolutely.
In Judaism, it's called Tikkun Olam.
Mm,
And we're put here on earth, each one of us with a mission.
mm.
And our part, we understand, God understands that the world is fractured. And by healing it, we can seal those fractures with gold. We can seal those, and the vessel becomes even stronger, even stronger. And so each one of us can take one little fracture and make sure that it's our job, our contribution to healing the world.
So beautifully said. And I went to a retreat earlier, and the message was heal yourself, heal the world, over and over again. You got that.
Exactly.
Are you done now? We are done now. Thank you so much, Barbara, for your time, for being patient with me because I had my little ones homesick from school and daycare today, and for being so generous as usual with the life lessons that you have learned from all of your travels and for the work that you continue to do. I can't believe that every time we connect, you're in a different country or you've just returned from another country teaching, teaching so that the paradigm does shift because this is how it's done. I'm really, really grateful for your work. My daughters are grateful for your work because it impacted their entry, their initial profound imprint into this reality.
Thank you too.
Thank
We're
you,
all in
Barbara.
this together.